Okay, let's get going with today's session. I'm delighted to welcome Mark Harrison, the Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the Chartered Institute of Building. For the past 4 years, Mark has been transforming the CIOB's approach to equality, diversity and inclusion on a global scale. He's been championing best practice, driving positive cultural change, and making the CIOB and the wider built environment sector more inclusive, accessible and representative. Before his current role, he's worked on diversity and inclusion organisations including the University of London and the Children's Society. Mark's got lots of insights to share on EDI today and how you can drive change in your organisation and your sector. There'll be a chance to ask him questions at the end. So as I said earlier, please put any questions in the Q&A section, not the chat, which will be closing off. If you would like this session to have live captions brought up, there is that functionality at the bottom of your Zoom window. You should see show captions and you should be able to select that in order to have captions accompanying the audio. And as I said earlier, also there will be downloads of the slides if you want to catch up on those later. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mark and really look forward to hearing what Mark's got to say. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Gareth, and hello, everybody. It's fantastic to hear what an international group of delegates we have today. Wonderful to see. So, as Gareth has said, my name is Mark Harrison. I'm Head of EDI, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion for the Chartered Institute of Building. For those of you that don't know or not familiar, the CIOB is, we think, probably the largest professional member institute in the world. We have some 50,000 members, predominantly project managers, construction site managers, and yes, we are similarly international with members from in places like Hong Kong, Australia, South Africa, in the States, Canada, the UK and Ireland, of course, and we've got, very proud to say, we've got one member in Kathmandu. So we are, yeah, we've got a similar reach. So today I've been asked to talk to you about the why, the what, and the how. A little agenda for you there, just to clarify what I'm going to be talking about. We're going to talk, just make sure we're on the same page with some definitions. Then look at the profile of the UK construction sector. I would ideally like to talk about the construction sector globally, but that's problematic in terms of demographics. We don't have consistent metrics that we can use, something that we're working on. But at the moment, as an example, we're going to use the UK. We're then going to talk about the business case for EDI, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, some initiatives that we are undertaking at the CIOB. I'm going to talk about our special report and charter for employers, and then I'm going to mention briefly the partnership working we're doing with the other main professional membership institutes in the built environment sector. So in terms of definitions, I think certainly it's fair to say that the word equality came into parlance, became very common in the 60s and 70s, certainly in the UK and in the States. It was associated with legislation that was brought in to address discrimination. So it was part of that post-civil rights movements, political change, and was very much a sort of seen as a measure against discrimination. The word diversity was far more commonly in parlance, in use in the 1990s. I think it's fair to say it was became popular in the United States and has since become ubiquitous in some ways. And it's a more positive, as opposed to equality being against something negative. Diversity was a word that was there to emphasize the positive in respect of the value of difference between people. It's a positive thing. And then we come to inclusion, which is possibly the word that's most useful, I think, because inclusion is what we're aiming for, really. So it's about people being included in the workplace, for example, and being included in decision making, being able to fully participate. And of course, inclusion is an action. Diversity can be just a fact of reality, but we choose, make a decision whether to be inclusive or not. I suppose it's also worth mentioning that the word equity, which we also use and is perhaps more commonly used these days in the circles that I work in than equality, and that the word equity is certainly more commonly used since the Black Lives Matter, and it's there. The meaning is to understand the fact that people have historic barriers to overcome. It's not, we have to recognize that not everyone is at the same starting place, that some people have those barriers before they get to the workplace or they get to the university. So that's another word that obviously we hear a lot on this agenda. I hope that's helpful. So as I say, we don't yet have good metrics in terms of the globe, but we do know that the sector, there is underrepresentation in the built environment sector. That is broadly reflective around the world. It's different in different places, but broadly we can see that it is a male-dominated industry. For example, in the UK, we know that only around 2% of on-site operatives are female. We do have about 18% of the industry, so office staff, for example, support staff are female, but it's still only 18%. Similarly, in the UK, Black and Asian employees make up only 6% of the workforce, and that's compared to around about 14% of the UK population. And we do know from other surveys undertaken, so Action Sustainability do an annual diversity survey report in the UK, and they've found that almost half of all applicants for jobs in the UK workforce in built environment sector are from Black and Asian employees. So there's a huge disparity there. We also know that disabled employees only make up around 6% of the workforce, compared to most estimates are around about 18% of the population. So significant underrepresentation there as well. Similarly, LGBT plus workers, so workers who, in respect of sexual orientation, believe that it's a barrier to their career progression. That's a very high percentage, of course. And then we have an aging workforce in the UK. We know that we have over 35% of our workforce is over the age of 50, and with an average retirement age of 55. This is a significant issue and will increasingly be an issue in the forthcoming years, particularly as we know only around about 10% of the workforce is between the ages of 19 and 24. So we have significant underrepresentation, and we also, at the same time, in the UK, have a particular shortage of people. The Construction Leadership Council in 2019 found that 40% of companies were experiencing some difficulty, and 16% encountering severe difficulties in recruiting construction project managers. And it's worth noting that this was some time ago. This was pre-COVID, and those figures really will have gotten worse by now. They'll be heading in the wrong direction. Similarly, the Construction Industry Training Board, more recently, 2023, found that almost 250,000 construction workers are needed in the next 3 years, and that is just to meet existing demand. That's not taking account of any increase in demand or new projects. So there we have, on the one hand, severe underrepresentation in the sector, and on the other hand, a shortage of people that is really beginning to impact on plans and projects. Of course, it's been said that the culture, the workplace culture in the construction sector isn't necessarily welcoming. And I've had one particular female member, who I won't name, but came to me and said, well, look, this is her experience on site as a young Asian woman in the UK. She's very often in her role the only woman on site, which makes her uncomfortable. Very often the PPE, the protective equipment, doesn't fit. And we know that PPE that doesn't fit can very often be more dangerous than not wearing any PPE at all. So if your gloves are too big or your boots are too big, that can actually cause more of a problem than if you didn't bother, frankly. So that's a problem. Also, the tools are designed for men. They're designed for male bodies, the physiology of male bodies. And very often there are no women's toilet facilities. And the female colleagues have to go down the road, go to a shopping centre, or find somewhere else to use the toilet. There also can be social expectations that, to team building exercises, social events that very often involve alcohol consumption, which can be off-putting to certain people, particularly those with religious observances. And finally, we have had reports, I'm afraid, from various parts of the sector that there is hostile banter. So people who think making jokes about their colleagues is somehow acceptable, and that makes the atmosphere much less than welcoming. So all in all, I asked the question at the top of the slide there, would you come back? And I think that's a fair question to that colleague who that I spoke to. So we've seen the underrepresentation in the sector. We've seen a picture of a people shortage in the sector, but that's not the only reason. That's not the only case for embedding EDI into the sector. I would argue into every sector. In fact, we know from various research, so from organisations like Deloitte, organisations like EY, McKinsey, that organisations that embrace equality, diversity and inclusion and respect colleagues with difference, they know that research shows that they are more creative. And that, essentially that means they're better at decision making. So people with different backgrounds, with diverse experience, will bring things to the table, bring things to those meetings, and avoid the potential risks of negative groupthink, where everyone is sat round agreeing with each other and not considering other possibilities. And of course, people with different needs, with different backgrounds, will also be more likely to produce inclusive or embed inclusive design in the product, in that the built environment, what we're here for. So the buildings will be more useful to more people. There's also, of course, research that shows very clearly that organizations that have particularly diverse boards and gender balance on boards are 40% more profitable, and that's a global statistic produced by the McKinsey Foundation. So lots of good reasons why companies should embed EDI. Further reasons are that staff who feel valued for their contributions at work, rather than judged on their personal characteristics, deliver on average, the research shows, on average 30% more discretionary effort, which is very difficult to argue against. And of course, that discretionary effort means more satisfied customers, more satisfied clients, and better company results. And of course, it will impact as well on retention, staff retention, which is an issue. It's not just about recruitment, of course. We need to think about retention, so that's helpful in that respect. Companies that are diverse and gender balanced also have enhanced reputation in global markets. And we've seen evidence as well that increasingly younger generations are concerned to work for organizations that display commitment to issues like sustainability and diversity and inclusion. They want to work for organizations that have visible commitment to that. And of course, those young people will increasingly become clients and will want to employ contractors that have that visible commitment. So there's a case there for kind of commercial advantage. And the final reason, I tend to put this last because I think it's the least compelling argument, but it is an argument and it is a requirement. We need to comply with local legislation. That legislation changes around the world, of course, but there is equalities legislation in place in many countries and many regions. So certainly having a commitment to diversity and inclusion and treating people fairly will make you less likely as an organization to face costly costly legal action that can also result in reputational damage. So lots and lots of good reasons there to have a commitment to EDI, but as the slide says, don't take my word for it. These are in front of you the logos of some very successful international companies, some corporates that dedicate significant resources to the EDI agenda because they recognize the very real value in doing so. So the CIOB, why is the CIOB committed to equality, diversity and inclusion? Well, first of all, we have a charter that sets out our first, well, it's a set of objectives, the first objective of which is to promote the science and good practice in construction. But it states it's for the public benefit. So we have a duty to act in the public good. We are not just here to promote the interests of our members. We have that Royal Charter objective. So it's also, of course, as I've said, notable that we have a global membership and we want to be able to understand the needs, meet the needs of those members around the world. We do have a role in promoting productive and sustainable change. And of course, that includes promoting EDI in the sector in line with those UN ESG goals. It's worth noting that the CIOB's current president has committed to the organization to meeting those ESG goals. We also have a role in helping to address the skills shortage in the sector. So we have a corporate plan, and one of the key themes in the corporate plan is to address the skills shortage, the people shortage in the sector, to ensure that the sector is financially sustainable into the future. So in terms of what we've been doing, we have adopted an internal action plan. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but that's a 5-year plan aligned to our current corporate plan. We also have a member-led advisory panel. They have a sort of critical friend role. They horizon scan and keep us on track in terms of EDI against our commitments and hold us to account and make sure that we are doing what we say we're going to do. We also have published a special report and charter. Again, I'll talk about that in a moment. and we have, as a result, an employers forum. Now that forum any company that signs up to the charter is invited along to the employers forum, which is Chatham House rules, and what that means is that we don't attribute comments to any individual or any company, but we do share good practice. We do share challenges that we're facing. That might be data collection or how to address, how to promote disability inclusion, for example. So we do share that good practice. We share the lessons learned, but we don't attribute. And that's proving very popular. Those are quarterly meetings, and they're well attended and great discussions on that forum. So people learn a lot from that. We also have our EDI awards, and actually that's currently on our website. If you want to nominate an individual or a corporate entity for an EDI award, then you can do so on the CIOB website. We want to recognise good practice, best practice, and we want to celebrate people who are actually making the change in the sector. So it's very much a positive initiative. That, yeah, I think it's really important not to be seen just as raising issues. We want to be seen to be promoting people who are actually making the necessary change. So I think you've got until the end of this month, not long now, to nominate or an individual or a corporate if you so wish. The other final initiative on this slide is the ambassador role. So we do have a role for our members that sit on our hub committees around the globe, and what we want to do is hear from those members. So we've elected to set up this role, ambassador role, and people can volunteer to ensure that EDI is on the agenda at hub committees around the world. You know, we have a very small EDI team at CIOB of myself and one other person, Eleanor. We can't be everywhere at once, much that we'd like to travel around the world. I'm not sure the CEO would agree the budget for that. So we're very keen to hear from people working on the ground, as it were, and hear what needs to be discussed back in our advisory panel. We've also recently published a technical information sheet for smaller companies, and that's going to be accompanied very soon by a case study best practice paper. We do recognise, of course, that most of the sector, the construction sector, is smaller companies, SMEs. So we have dedicated those documents to step-by-step advice. These aren't academic documents discussing the reasons for disadvantage and discrimination. These are documents setting out steps companies can take in order to promote or adopt an inclusive approach. There was both of those documents. Well, actually, the technical information sheet is already available on the CIOB Academy website, and the case study paper is being published next month. That will be on the CIOB main website. I've mentioned the special report. I'll come back to that in a second. And we've also, I mentioned PPE as well, that in the last couple of slides, we recognised how important that was. So we had a campaign run by our former president, Sandy Rees-Jones, to promote the distribution of PPE that fits for everybody. And it's interesting. Initially, we started off talking about PPE that fits women, but then there were men coming to us and saying, well, actually, it's important to me. I'm not the average size man. I'm a smaller man, and the PPE doesn't fit me either. We had people with different religious observances, different, pregnant women, for example, saying this is a really important campaign. So that's an ongoing campaign to ensure that everybody who comes on site is safe. It's a health and safety issue, obviously. We've also launched some resources, some training resources. That includes the a MOOC, Massive Open Online Course, which is a 3-week course that is free to access on the CIOB Academy website, and that's kind of an extended version of this, I suppose, a very extended version of this presentation. We talk about what do we mean by EDI, we talk about what the issues are in respect of EDI in the construction sector, in the built environment sector, I should say, and then we talk about solutions, practical solutions. And the MOOC includes resources, so video interviews, papers, articles to read, and each week there's a quiz, a test, as it were, to see that people have been picking up the learning. So it's interactive. There are other students completing that, and I think we've had nearly 500 students complete that MOOC now. I should say you do have to pay for the certificate at the end if that's what you want, but which I think is about £70 sterling. But the course itself is free, so please have a look at that. And we also have a biennial. Every 2 years we have an EDI CIOB conference. That conference is international. We have the last one we had speakers, a panel from colleagues in South Africa, Washington DC in America, and Toronto in Canada. We've also had speakers historically from Australia, which time zone was a bit challenging, but we managed it with some cooperation from colleagues there. So really interesting conversations there on the practical challenges, but also the successes as well, focusing on good news stories. And I also say we also work, we've been working with our colleagues in the professional member institutes, and I'll talk a little bit about that, a bit more about that in a second. Our action plan, I'm not going to talk too much about this because I'm sure people know what an action plan is, but it is a very much, my approach to EDI is very much on action and on metrics and outcomes that can be measured. We need to have tangible benefits so people can see the value for money. So there is senior ownership, that's very important. And I have to report annually to our board of trustees. So there is accountability and transparency. Very important that on an action plan. And I suppose also to say that the action plans are written with high level objectives for every department within the CIOB. So there is joint accountability. Our special report and charter for employers I've mentioned. Really it's there to promote EDI in the sector. We don't, we're a membership organisation, we're not a governmental organisation. We're not an auditor, we have no authority. So really it's very much a sort of a carrot to get employers in the sector around the world working with us to promote a more welcoming, inclusive and representative sector. Accompanying the charter is a report, a special report, which sets out examples of best practice. And those examples of best practice, international examples, are linked to the 5 commitments in the charter that I'll talk about in a moment. Launched in November 2021, we now have approaching 280 signatories, gone up over the last few days. And I think it's worth saying as well that the commitments in the charter were written, they're very high level, they're not prescriptive because we recognize that companies who sign will be operating in very different environments, legally, for example, culturally, around the globe. So we can't dictate what fairness and inclusion means from our office in London. There'll be different perspectives on that. But what we do is give 5 commitments that are tailorable to any environment and any size of organisation as well. I have to say that we recognise that the sector is made up of, the majority of the sector is SMEs, small employers. So those 5 key commitments in the charter are to show leadership. We want to see senior leaders in organisations making it clear they understand the business case for EDI, and we've mentioned that already, both within their organisations but also externally in the sector. It's very important that, because if you don't get that in an organization, very often people who are under pressure, which is, we are seeing that at the moment in the built environment sector, financial pressures can put EDI to one side. There can be a tendency to do that. So it's important for leaders to show that this is a priority. The second commitment is to make a plan. Essentially, that starts with collecting data on the workforce and then comparing that to the demographics of the the environment that you're operating in. So that might be a large city, that might be a region, it could be a country if you're a national organization. So compare to where you're drawing your employers from, and then you'll be able to identify the underrepresentation and put together an action plan to address that underrepresentation. The third action is the third commitment, I should say, is to prepare the culture. So I think I mentioned a minute ago, it's not just about, we recognize it's not just about recruitment, this promoting EDI, it's also about retention. So we do see evidence in the sector of people joining, women, for example, joining the sector, taking on roles, but then leaving fairly quickly because the culture is not welcoming or inclusive. So we need to adopt actions to address that. Transparency is also a good thing. We want to see companies promoting EDI, but we also want them to be transparent in, and that requires them to post their action plans on a website on an annual basis, so that people can see that their commitment isn't just a message. It's not ticking a box. These are the actions they're taking, and this is the success they're having. We're realistic. We don't expect people to solve all the problems of the world, all the ills of society in a year, but transparency is certainly a positive thing. And finally, the final commitment there is accountability. We recognize that changing a company's culture, particularly in larger organizations, is a real challenge. And we can't expect junior staff to do that, with no authority, no budget. That won't work. So what we want to see is the chief executive or an executive director coming in and taking responsibility and being accountable for these 5 key commitments. I hope I've made a case already for why signing up to the Charter, but I'll try and do it a little bit more. The Charter does provide that roadmap for change. We do believe, as the research has shown, that companies that are more inclusive and welcoming do have competitive advantage in the marketplace and improved credibility with clients, particularly into the future. They're going to develop a better reputation as a welcoming employer. Another slide of company logos for you. These are companies that have signed up to the Diversity and Inclusion Charter. Excuse me for a sec. This is a bit UK centric, and apologies for that. But some of you will know the names of these companies, and they are major companies, certainly in the UK. There's a link there to sign up to the Charter, and I understand from Gareth that the slides will be circulated afterwards, so you can have a look at that. It takes about 15 minutes to sign up. It's free and will help you move on your journey. I'd just like to mention the partnership working that we're doing with the other professional member institutes, the main ones in the UK, and they're all international as far as I know. So we've got the Institution of Civil Engineers, the Royal Institute of British Architects, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, Royal Town Planning Institute, and the Landscape Institute. And we, that sort of EDI reps got together a few years ago, 2 years ago now, I think, and we realized we all had the same issues in terms of our membership. We were convinced that our membership is not representative, and this is an issue for us. collectively, we've got a combined membership of some 350,000 around the globe, so some significant weight there. But we recognise that we might work together. Working together will give us consistency and will save us time in some ways because we were all working on the same agenda, so it made sense. So we got our chief execs to sign up to a memorandum of understanding, and we put together an action plan in July of 2022, and we're working through that action plan now. We jointly host a meeting every year, and we give an update back to our chief execs. And I'm very pleased to say that I think this is the first time these institutes have worked together on this scale. So I think to some degree we are leading the way, which is very positive. We've got three key areas in respect of our first set of actions. The first is standardizing data protection, data collection, I beg your pardon. So we recognize that we don't have enough data on who our members are, who's in the profession, which are the groups that are underrepresented in particular roles. There are similarities, of course, but we need real data to understand where that underrepresentation is, and to target our limited resources into activities that will make the most change. So in order to be most effective, we need the data. So we are working together to standardize that data collection. We're about to publish a reviewed set of questions that we're going to ask both in the UK and the Republic of Ireland, but also internationally as well. So we're going to be producing some guidance in the hope that others will adopt that, so we can have a consistent picture right across the built environment. The second area of activity is around fixing the leaking pipeline between education and employment. So we know in the built environment, anecdotally, certainly around the world, but certainly we've got hard data in the UK that students are increasingly diverse, and there's improved gender balance as well. So that's good news. The bad news is that it's not translating into the professions. So we're not seeing that improvement in the representation in the employment sector. So why is that? We're going to try and find out why. We've commissioned research into to try and find out where that pipeline is leaking. We have some ideas. We certainly know that in the UK there's an awarding gap in higher education, a race awarding gap. But we also know that there is a retention issue in the employment sector as well. So we're doing some research so we can find out exactly what's going on there. And finally, we've agreed to work together to raise standards on an understanding of EDI across the built environment sector. And this talks to producing CPDs. Is that the five-minute call, is it, Gareth? Right, I take your point. So yeah, we're working together to produce materials that will use the same language and raise that understanding right across the sector. This work also includes putting on events. So we've had events on sexual orientation. We've had events on race equity. We recently had an event on how to promote disability inclusion and employment. And I won't talk in detail about this because time is short, but just to let you know that we did a really good workshop at the end of that event that came out with some tips on how to be a disability inclusive employer. And you can see the 8 top tips there. If you'd like to see the detail behind those top tips, it's available on the CIOB website and in our news section in the blogs. I'll be happy to share that link. But you'll notice that there's some familiar words there, some familiar terms that I've already spoken about. So there is consistency across that. But I've been talking for far too long, and in the interests of engagement with the audience, I will stop there, and I will say thank you very much for your time, and I will hand back to Gareth. Thank you very much, Gareth.
Thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, I was enjoying that, so I thought I'd let you keep going. And thanks to all of you who put some questions in the Q&A. Please feel free to put some more in there. I'll get to some of those shortly. One of the questions that we've had internally, because we're going on an EDI journey at the CQI as well. We're doing a lot of kind of internal review, and also this is part of our kind of externally focused stuff. But people often feel they need expertise in EDI before they even get started, and they kind of feel nervous about kind of a gap of understanding of all the issues. To what degree is that true, and where can people learn more about the issues?
It's a question we get a lot. I mean, I guess it's the first thing to say is to acknowledge that when we're talking about EDI, we are talking about a very, very broad agenda. And if you look at, for example, we've got the 9 protected characteristics in the UK. I know there's different terminology around the world, but we're talking about age, gender, we're talking about disability, sexual orientation, we're talking about race, religion, and belief. If you just take one of those, disability, it's a huge subject matter area. So you can talk all day. We can talk all day about the issues facing disabled people in employment. But then what about the issues facing disabled people in the built environment, in terms of getting around, accessibility, even that? I mean, you can talk about access to buildings, but then there's access in terms of the colour schemes for people with visual disability, facilities for people with hearing loss. So it's a huge subject area. So there is no shame in feeling slightly daunted about that fact. And it is obvious to say it, but it's been quite an emotive policy area for some time, and most recently, of course, around about Me Too and Black Lives Matter. And understandably, people get very impatient for change, as it were. So I guess I would say, do reach out for expertise. If an organization is lacking that expertise, it is out there. I mean, I guess to a certain degree, you have to be careful. EDI is not a kind of regulated subject area. There's not really that many qualifications in EDI. So, look for people who have experience, and also do the reading. I mean, that's the other thing. I would say there's lots of good resources out there, lots of good reading, books are out there, and make the use of that time, and don't be daunted by the fact that it is somewhat emotive, I suppose. Please reach out for that expertise.
Great, thank you for that. Some more questions coming in, which is great. One of the earlier ones came from Peter. He said the business case is very strong, particularly from a quality perspective for problem solving and improvement. However, I haven't previously seen much in the way of tangible benefits. Can you give some examples? So maybe it's the difference to the bottom line. I'm not sure, but in terms of kind of tangible, provable deliverables.
No, it's a good question. I mean, I would always point people to the McKinsey reports. Deloitte have done reports that talk to the bottom line, the financial bottom line, and McKinsey in particular have been producing. They're a consultancy in the States, and they've been producing reports for many years now, and they consistently evidence the fact that companies with a commitment to EDI that have more diverse workforces are more profitable, more creative, more successful, and people are happier working for them. It's not, perhaps it's no surprise that some of the most successful companies we have in the world at the moment are based in Silicon Valley in California, where it's probably some of the most inclusive culture we see in terms of the wider society there. But one example that actually relates to that is an example from, I think it was 2018. People could look this up. It's on Google, and it's well documented. But there was Apple released an app, a health app, and they did it in a very grand way, as they do, and with a presentation on a stage to a big audience. And someone in the audience during this presentation asked, a woman put her hand up in the audience and said, "Why, is there a reason why there's no mention of menstruation or menstrual cycles on the health app?" And this was obviously a reputational damage for Apple at the time. They had to go away and do some work and relaunch this app. So they realised, I think there weren't any women on the development team. So there's a tangible example of what can happen if you're not inclusive in design.
Thank you. Right now, my computer seems to be playing some games with me. Hang on. My camera. There we are. I'm back. There was a question quite early on. Somebody said, "I work in the disability sector with employees of various academic backgrounds and abilities. One of the issues is ensuring the information is communicated in the right way to various stakeholders. Are there any proven methods or tools that can be used to make information immediately accessible without having to produce various versions of things?"
So I'm not entirely sure, forgive me, I'm not entirely sure I understand the question. Certainly in terms of employment, in the employment sector, we have, of course, the provision of reasonable adjustments to employees that declare the need for reasonable adjustments. And I would always advocate that the information that's passed on is about the adjustment and doesn't necessarily need to be about the condition or the medical condition. And that there is best practice around that, and certainly the best way I've seen it managed is by having passports, reasonable adjustment passports, whereby an employee retains the document within an organization, and when they move or to a new role, to a new line manager, or where their manager changes, or whether their role changes, or whether perhaps their condition changes, because we know 70% of disability is attained through life. We're not most disability, we're not born with it, we attain it. So that can change the nature of a condition, and in that way, having that document owned by the employee ensures it's up to date and providing the employer with the best information. I'm not entirely sure I've answered the question, though. I think there was some mention of academic in there, I think.
Yeah, it's people with I guess, diversity of backgrounds, and yeah, I mean, it's a tricky question. Maybe it's something we can reflect on later. I've got another tricky question for you here.
Okay.
Do you think that EDI necessitates a redefinition of what we mean by value, considering social value and so on?
Yeah, social value. Yeah, I mean, I've been an EDI practitioner for many years now, and we've often had conversations about social value and the impact of EDI. Personally, for me, because I am employed in a commercial sector, I always revert to the business case, because that's what the majority of employers in the sector will will respond to in a positive way. Not all of them by any means, but certainly a focus on social value is important. I mentioned the UN ESGs. That's about social value, isn't it? And I do think it's an important angle. It's certainly not when I talk about, as you'll notice, it's not when I talk about first. But yeah, of course, social value is very, very important. I think possibly that's a bigger conversation though about the way society functions, isn't it? That's a bigger political question, perhaps.
Yeah, it is a broader one, and again, it's you have to have it in the context of that broader discussion. There's one here which I'll read it as it is, and I think we perhaps kind of consider it slightly differently. It says, are there strategies to include EDI training and considerations in the training of quality professionals to audit accessibility and inclusivity? Obviously, you don't work directly in the quality profession, but maybe this is about how we get EDI incorporated into training that otherwise might just focus on the technical skills and actually, bringing it into the training package.
Yeah. Well, certainly, you won't be surprised to hear that I would advocate for embedding a consideration of EDI into any and all training. It will have an impact everywhere. So for example, I talked to our finance team about how do we embed EDI into our procurement. We want to work with companies that are committed, that recognise our commitment to EDI and similarly are committed themselves. So there's aspects of EDI in finance. When it came to, I was once challenged by someone who said, I bet I can come up with an area of work that there's no aspect of EDI, and then he said pest control. In housing, we run a pest control company, and how on earth can we? But it was an amusing exercise. But of course, if you think about pest control operatives going into people's houses, the need to respect cultural norms, take the shoes off or cover their shoes, having documents that are translated into all different languages, for example, and providing braille where necessary. So I'd say that every aspect of training should give consideration to EDI, and it will improve the quality of any product, I would argue.
Yeah, I think it comes down to EDI by design, EDI being built into everything, not being a bolt-on, but actually you're considering it when you're starting a project, when you're doing anything new, you're considering those aspects from the outset rather than considering it at the end of when you've done something.
That's absolutely right.
Change for a lot of organisations, isn't it?
No, that's absolutely a good point, Gareth. It is. It's about planning it in and the forethought, and often inclusion and particularly accessibility in the physical sense is about forethought. It's not necessarily an expensive exercise. It's far more expensive in the end to try and add it in retrospectively, as you pointed out. Yeah, good point.
We've only got a couple of minutes. The last few questions are kind of directly about the CIOB stuff, and you may just have to kind of point people in the direction of some of this. The first question is, what has the PPE program achieved to date? And there was kind of more about rollout, but what do you think the results of that have been?
So it was really a campaign to raise awareness, and I think it's been successful in that. As I said, we are a professional member institute. We're not a regulator. We're not an arm of government. So that's what we can do. We've certainly done that. I've heard that questions have been raised in various houses of Parliament, certainly in Scotland, I understand, and I know that measures have been adopted in one UK local. It's a county authority in the north of England has adopted measures to ensure that all of their places of work now have on offer inclusive PPE. So it's not going to happen overnight, but we're certainly raising the awareness of it, and there's been a lot of noise on social media about it, and positive publicity encouraging employers to distribute and provide PPE that fits. So every little sort of helps, as it were, I suppose.
Excellent. And finally, there are a couple of questions about CIOB membership. So are there special developing country rates to join and become chartered in CIOB? And the other one is, are there avenues for persons with disabilities to join the CIOB and participate in committees and activities?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that the advice there would be to look at the CIOB website. We have very clear advice and guidance on applying for membership. I can say positively that we do have reasonable adjustments in terms of assessments for our processes of becoming chartered members. So that is there.
Mark, thank you so much for giving your time today to talk to us, sharing what's going on in the CIOB, but also some takeaways I think people can apply whatever their company does in whatever sector, in whatever country, in terms of some principles. So really appreciate you talking to us today.
Well, thank you, Gareth, and thanks everybody for listening, and grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody, for attending. When we close the session out, there'll be a survey. Please tell us what you thought about it. Really like to know the feedback that we get after a session. Don't forget, there's one more Careers Week session to come, which is tomorrow at 7 till 8:30, which is led by our Derby and Nottingham branch. You can find information about that on our website, quality.org, and you can catch up via our YouTube channel over the course of the next week or so on all of the sessions that we've had this week. So yes, thank you very much to Mark once more. Thank you very much to everybody who's attended, and we hope to see you again at another CQI webinar again soon. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.